Thank you for joining Cancer Support Community Atlanta for this program. Please visit our website, cscatlanta.org, for a complete list of live and recorded events. We invite you to sign up for our newsletter to stay connected to all future programs.
And welcome to all of the new faces. Hello again to all of my familiar faces. So the prompt that Lauren gave me for this month was freezer meals, and I thought about breakfast because that's not always something that we plan ahead for. It is often sort of a last minute thing, but I love freezer meals because it is money in the bank. We are going to make some whole wheat yogurt scones. Then we're gonna do some breakfast burritos. As always, with so many of my recipes, these are incredibly versatile. So I picked out some ingredients here today, but you can go in whatever direction you want. You can clean out your fridge with whatever things you want, and we'll talk about some different ideas there. So scones, of course, are just like they can be made sweet or savory. It's a traditional British pastry that's usually kind of described as like a sweet, crumbly sort of biscuit. Okay, so let's talk about the flour. What I'm using here is whole wheat pastry flour, which was a flour I was introduced to in graduate school. And I will tell you, it's not always the easiest thing to find. I looked at two different Publixes, and they do not seem to sell it at Publix. I have not looked at Kroger. They do have it at DeKalb Farmers Market, and this came from Whole Foods. So what is different about whole wheat pastry flour is that not all flour is made from the same variety of wheat, and it's not all milled the same way. So to make white flour, we took the wheat berries and we polished off the outside, the bran, right? And that is what gives us this really soft, tender, delicate cake, muffin, all of that kind of thing. That is really delicious and appealing, but also, of course, all of the nutrients, much of the nutrients and the fiber are in that bran that we polished off. And that is why when we started realizing that nutrient deficiencies were a problem, we started adding those vitamins and nutrients back to the flour. So that when you see enriched flour, that means we did something to it to take some vitamins and minerals away, and then we put them back in so that we could combat nutrient deficiencies. All right, so we put some nutrients back in, but what you don't get back in is the fiber. So if you've ever tried to cook with whole wheat flour, you might have been on like I'm gonna get some more fiber in and this is gonna be really good, and then you made something, excuse my preheating oven, and then you made something that ended up being very like dense. And you were kind of like resentful about it, right? You were like, I guess I'm gonna feel really good about eating my fiber, but this tastes like a brick. And I hear you, I understand. And so I think whole wheat pastry flour is a really great alternative, all right? It's gonna land somewhere in between, right? You're still gonna taste the flavor of that wheat. It is gonna be a little more dense, but what they do is they take a soft summer wheat that is lower in gluten, and that is what they grind up to make whole wheat pastry flour. It's just a different variety rather than a hard red winter wheat that is what is often in all-purpose flour and whole wheat flour. So that's the difference. If you cannot find whole wheat pastry flour, you can still make these scones. You can absolutely one-for-one substitute all-purpose flour. You can also, if you kind of want to go partway there, you could do 50% whole wheat flour and 50% all-purpose flour, and that would work just fine. You absolutely could do 100% whole wheat flour if you're feeling really virtuous. And if you're okay and good with a more dense scone. No judgment if that's the direction that you want to go. I just think this is a nice happy medium. Whole wheat pastry flour works in muffins. It works in all sorts of other, pancakes, waffles, all kinds of things, and it's a great way to get some extra fiber in, which 90% or more of Americans are fiber deficient. We're just not getting enough fiber in our diet. You might also have heard that fiber in our digestive system is what feeds our gut microbiome. It's one of the things that feed our gut microbiome. Our gut microbiome, all those little beneficial bacteria in our digestive system, is what essentially is like the first line of defense against bad bugs and bad things that could make us sick. And it keeps our immune system from having to be constantly activated, right? So if our gut microbiome is healthy, because we're getting fermented foods, we talked about gut health last time I was here, and we're getting plenty of fiber and lots of variety of fruits and vegetables and whole grains and nuts and beans and seeds, then we're keeping our gut microbiome happy, and then we're chilling out our immune system, and things are much better. All right, so there's my spiel. Let's also talk about measuring flour. So if you have a kitchen scale and you measure your baked goods, that's a great approach. If you don't have a kitchen scale, that's okay. But there is a right way to measure flour, and it is not this. Right? Just sticking it in there, even if you had a bigger bag. Does anybody know why we shouldn't just like scoop? Yeah.
Because it gets packed in, so you're actually using more flour.
That's right, yeah. So when I was a baby pre-dietitian in college, they made us do it 2 different ways and put it on a scale and measure it to show us the difference. And when recipes are made and designed, they're standardized so that you'll get the, so that you'll get the same weight per volume if you use this method versus just the scoop method. Now, yeah? Yeah, so sifting is another thing that when a person that designs a recipe is going to tell you, right? If they've sifted the flour before they've measured it, that's also going to impact that, sort of fluffs it up. It also is going to incorporate, usually you're sifting your, or sometimes you're sifting your other dry ingredients into it as well. You could sift this. I usually don't bother. I never have bothered, and it's come out fine. But I will go ahead and show you. We're going to start with 2 cups of whole wheat pastry flour, and I usually do this over a bowl or a Tupperware lid or something else that I'm not using. I don't do it into the bowl that I'm going to be working with, because then I'm messing all of my measurements up. So I'm just going to scoop, right, until it's sort of just fluffed in there. We're not going to pack it down like you would brown sugar. We're going to scoop it in there until I've got sort of somewhat of a mountain going on top. And then I'm going to take a knife, fill in those holes. There's one little hole right there. And then I'm going to put it over here in the bowl that I'm going to use. So we'll just do that one more time to get my 2 cups. Now, again, of course, like some recipes, you might have been like scooping your flour your whole life, and you're like, everything's fine. Why do I, and if you're going about your way doing fine, that's okay. I will say some recipes are much more forgiving than others, right? There's also things like humidity in the air that's going to impact a recipe. There's all kinds of things. How old your flour is, lots of things that will impact a recipe. I know that particularly if you're doing something like a cake, that's where this methodology is going to make the biggest difference. And then, of course, sometimes, with a dough, so much of it is about the feeling of it. And so sometimes that just takes practice. So before I put this away, I'm going to take all that extra flour that I had left over and just dump it right back in. I'm still making a mess. Right back in my bag, and then we're done with that. All right, so we're going to mix in our tablespoon of baking powder, 3 tablespoons of sugar. So if you're making savory, I would leave the sugar out, as the recipe says. I played around with the sugar amount in here. The first time I tested it, I made it with 2 tablespoons of sugar, and it was fine. 3 tablespoons of sugar I felt like was right where I wanted it. But if you want to reduce the sugar, you're still going to get a fine product if you want to drop it down. So I've got 3 tablespoons of sugar there. I've got half a teaspoon of salt. So just gonna take a whisk and sort of get all of those guys incorporated. All right, so when you're making pie crust or biscuits or scones, and we're gonna incorporate butter, I went ahead earlier, I took my butter, I cut it into little cubes, and I threw it in the freezer. Because when you're making pastries, cold butter is what you want, because when that butter melts, that's what sort of creates the layers and the flakiness between your flour. And if it's already melted when you start, right, then the flour just sort of absorbs it, and you don't get those layers, and you end up with a much more dense product. So I took my 6 tablespoons of butter and threw them in the freezer. Now, people have all kinds of methods for getting your butter incorporated into your flour. You can use a pastry blender if you have a pastry blender, and that's like a little handle thing with a bunch of different wires on it. So that's fine, you can press it in there. I've heard tell of people like using knives to cut it in. Yeah, see how big the butter is? I basically took the stick of butter, I got my 6 tablespoons. You could use a grater to grate the butter for sure. You could also throw it in your food processor. The thing that can sometimes happen is I find that this method, it gives me bigger chunks of butter than in the food processor. I find it can sometimes be easier to go too far, right? And then you get your butter pieces smaller, and then you don't have as nice of flakes in your pastry. So I'm just trying to make sure these guys are all, I sort of search around until I find one that hasn't been smashed, right? And then I make sure to give it a smash so that I don't have any just like big cubes. And then I'll just keep trying to like work it a little bit with my hands until all these pieces, you know, I'm getting them kind of like, if that's a whole cube bit, I'm giving it kind of a smash until it's sort of like flat. And so then you're going to end up with literal like butter flakes. And the butter flakes translate more into pastry flakes. There we go. There we go. So yeah, I'll just sort of keep doing that sort of motion with my fingers until I feel like we've gotten all the big chunk pieces broken down. And I'm just about there. The thing about this dough is that you really want to handle it as little as possible. You'll find this with biscuits, right? The more you knead and work it, the more you develop the gluten, and that's great for a chewy sourdough loaf. It's not so great for your delicate pastry. All right, so we got all our little pieces in there. Let's crumbly. There's some big bits, there's some small bits. We're not too worried about them all being perfect. All right, so if it was like super, super hot in my kitchen and I was getting distracted or doing other things, I might even take this and throw it back in the freezer while I'm working, but we're not gonna be here for too long. Okay, next thing we've got is all of our wet ingredients. Oh, wait, no, I forgot one thing. At this point, I'm also gonna go ahead and throw in my flavorings. So the mix-in items in here are, it says 1 cup of mix-ins. I've chosen to do a mixture of apricots and chocolate chips. Those scones over there that I baked off this morning also have cinnamon in them. I thought this kitchen had cinnamon. It does not, but we had ginger, so we're gonna go ginger. And then on the second page, I think it gives you some volumes, but I ended up doing 2 teaspoons of cinnamon, and here I'm gonna do 2 teaspoons of ginger. We'll all see how this works out. Also, the first time I tested this recipe, I did regular standard size chocolate chips, and that was fine. I think the mini chips is nice because they're just gonna get more incorporated into, so if you find mini chips, great. If you don't worry about it. But again, yeah, we're just gonna stir all this stuff in. and then set it over to the side while we get our wet ingredients mixed together, which is really just 3/4 a cup of Greek yogurt. I like whole milk Greek yogurt here, but you could use low fat or fat free. I like Greek yogurt here because it's gonna add extra protein. And then an egg. Now, could you use regular yogurt? Maybe, but I haven't tested it. The thing about yogurt, of course, is that it's not all created equal in terms of how liquidy it is, even Greek yogurt. So the Greek yogurt I used when I tested it last week was definitely thicker than the Greek yogurt today. This is Stonyfield. Stonyfield Greek yogurt is like medium Greek. If you do something like Faye or Chobani, those are real thick. I don't know that it's going to make the hugest amount of difference here. You could probably side-by-side measure it, but everyone in my family ate them both ways. All right, so I'm just going to get this egg and yogurt incorporated together. That's it. And then we're going to put our wet ingredients into our dry ingredients. So I just do a whole dump in. And again, the goal here is a little bit tricky, but you want to get it incorporated together so that you don't have big chunks of dry flour, but you don't want to overwork it. So it's a lot of just sort of like stirring and folding gently to kind of get everything, and eventually you're going to get something that's kind of like a craggy, dryish dough. You want it to be able to like form together into a cohesive dough, but it's okay if you've got some dry spots. It's okay. It's going to be kind of craggy. Now, if it still just feels like it's not coming together, and it feels like you could use a little bit more moisture, you could add some more liquid. It could be water. It could be a little bit more yogurt. It could be milk. But I would do it about like a teaspoon at a time. Now, this is getting together pretty well. There's a few dry spots in there, a little bit, but they're kind of on the inside, and it's kind of coming together. You could do this with a stand mixer, but I'd be real careful because you could overmix real fast. So, yeah, we've got most of our flour in there incorporated. And then we're just going to take this whole thing and dump it out on whatever surface we're going to shape it on. I like working in a bowl big enough to get my hands in. Yeah, this is feeling moist enough. It's a little sticky, but it's not like, what does Alton Brown call it? Club hand, when you just like coat your hand in dough and it's all just like sticky and gross. So you get a little bit of sticky hand, but not too bad. All right, so see, we got that into a nice little ball. There's a little flour here left on this, but at this point I want to do as little as possible to get it into the shape that I'm looking for, right? So I'm just going to sort of press it into a round. What I'm looking for is, I find the easiest thing to do is like a round disc, right? And you could even do this if you wanted to right on the sheet pan that you're going to do it on. I've got a parchment lined sheet pan. Sometimes I flip it over because that sort of helps even it out. But I'm going to get it to about an inch or so thick, and I'm usually trying to like close in these craggy edges that start to form. But I want it to get to about, yay big. It's usually about 8 or 9 inches across. Doesn't have to be perfect. All right, so now I've got it there. I'm going to rinse off my club hands. I don't know where that term came from. but I learned it from Alton Brown. Okay, if you've got a pastry or bench scraper, this works really well, but I'm just going to use this knife right here. Essentially what I'm trying to do is just get these separated enough that I can kind of pull them apart. And this dough today is a little bit wetter than even what I did last night with the ones I made. I usually cut it into 8. You could certainly cut it into 16s. They get a little bit harder to manage that way, but I'm just trying to get it to the point where I can kind of separate and pull them apart, just so they have a little bit of room to breathe. Because they will expand a little bit as they rise, because there's that baking powder in there. Okay, so this is a freezer meal. It's a freezer meal session. So what's beautiful about this is at this point, you can freeze these, right? Take them right here, pop them in the oven. I would even, if you can fit your sheet pan in the oven like this, I would freeze them first just on the sheet pan. And then once they've been in there for a couple of hours and fully frozen, then you can just like take them out and put them in a Ziploc bag or whatever. And then you can bake them directly from frozen. So everybody's got going on there. Okay, the last thing we're gonna do is just put a little egg wash on it. And folks, that is purely aesthetic. I mean, I suppose you get a little of the nutrients from the eggs, but really it just gives it that nice, shiny little sheen on there. Some people will do other things with their egg wash, like put milk in it. Sure, put milk in it. For me today, that would have required me to bring milk, and I wasn't putting milk in anything else. You don't have to put milk in it. This is literally just a mixed up egg. And so you just want to brush it all over. Usually I go to everyone first, and then with whatever egg I have left over, I go back and I get the sides and the back.
So 2 questions. If you're freezing it, do you do the egg wash after you?
Yeah, no, I would do the egg wash before I freeze it.
And freeze it, do you change the amount of time to bake it? Or?
Little bit more. So depending on your oven, I'm gonna bake these right now. We're gonna try them at 18. Well, we're gonna move on down here to burrito time. So really all we're gonna do is cook off some beans, scramble some eggs, and then put it all together. So we're gonna start with a couple of, actually let me grab another knife, a couple of basics. I know some of you guys have seen me do some of these basics knife skills before, but it's nice to have a review sometime. So the first instruction on here is to quick pickle the onions. I actually did this last night because I was making most of the burritos that we're having today last night. So all I did was slice red onions. This is a combination of red onions and bell peppers. Squeezed them with lime juice and salt. That was it. That's all I did. And then I took roasted red peppers right out of a jar, sliced them up. So that's what this is right here. But if you were doing this from start, I would start with your pickling your red onions in the lime juice, because even just 5 minutes in that lime juice is going to make a big difference on the red onions. When you add acid to onions, it leaves all kinds of the like tasty oniony flavor, but it really chills out those very strong sulfuric compounds that make your eyes water and make your breath stink. I won't say that you'll have no onion breath with these, but it definitely like turns the volume down when you add acid to onions, and just makes them more delicious. So I did that already. So the next thing we're going to do is work on the bean filling. We're going to start with an onion. I'm doing a modified version. I'm not making 8 of these because I made a lot of these yesterday. But we're going to start with an onion. So when we're cutting any sort of roly-poly vegetables, which many vegetables have round edges, few things in nature come with perfect right angles, right? So the first thing I like to do is just cut it in half so that we have a flat edge and it doesn't roll away from us anymore. I cut it stem to root, and then I'm going to peel back these outside layers. I peel it back, but I don't always take it all the way off. This one's being kind of thin and persnickety, but I peel back sort of as much as I can so that I don't have any of that papery bit anymore, but I leave it on. And the reason I leave it on is because it gives me a handle, which is nice for controlling what you're doing. If I've got a little stem on there a little bit, we'll throw that to the side. All right, from here, some people will go through the onion this way. I skip that step for several reasons. One, I don't think it's necessary. Two, it feels more dangerous than is necessary to me. So I think I get a just lovely dice or mince without that step. So I go straight to the step where I'm going to rainbow my knife, right? Like a bridge from one side to the other. I'm going to start with my knife angled at a really severe angle and just go down until I feel the cutting board. Now, I'm not going all the way to this root end because I want to keep that part intact. That just helps everything stay organized and hang out together. And then my next one, it's going to be less of a severe angle, and then when I get to the top, I'm straight up and down, and then I start working that angle again and again until I've just sort of gone all the way around. It's going to give me I'm following sort of the inside shape of the onion. From there, we've got all these strips. They're all held together here nice and organized, and now I can just go as thick or as thin as I want in this direction to give me a nice chop or mince or dice. And now look at that. We've got this nice pile of beautiful minced up onions. All right, so we'll scrape those to the side, and while we're at the cutting board, we'll work on the garlic. So to get that papery skin off of garlic, I'm going to give it a bang with the side of my knife to loosen everything up, and then give it a peel. Now, I'm then going to cut off that little root nub that's a little crusty and fibrous. Now, garlic does have sort of flat edges usually, which is nice. From here, it's your choice, right? Many of you guys have seen me do that mince technique where I add salt to it and I use the side of my knife like a palette knife. And that's a really nice technique if you want your onion or your garlic minced up all the way until it's going to be in like a vinaigrette or something, so you don't get big bites of garlic. Another thing you could do from here is take a microplane and grate it. I'm just going to give it a rough chop because it's going to be cooked into these beans. I'm okay with a little bit of a bigger piece. So yeah, just a rough chop is all I'm looking for here. All right, so I'm going to start this on, medium or so heat. We're going to add in a tablespoon or so of olive oil. Okay, while we're waiting for that, let's talk a little bit about eggs. If you salt your eggs in advance before you cook them, you end up with a more tender egg. If you don't have time for that, you're going to end up with fine, delicious eggs. Never fear. But if you have a few minutes to give them a little bit of a salt ahead of time, then that helps your eggs be a little bit more tender. I feel like operating this while talking and doing other things is like a left brain, right brain, left brain, right. Which side of my brain is working? Okay, so we got our onions. They're starting to cook over there a little bit. We just want to get them softened. In the meantime, I'm going to start these eggs. I'm going to add a little bit of olive oil to my pan. If you've got a cast iron pan or a nonstick pan, that's a great thing to use. Don't happen to have one here today. So I'm just going to add in my eggs. They've got a little salt in them. And then you can kind of let them just like hang out for a little minute there. We don't need to get right into it right away. Since our onions are going, I'm going to give them a little bit more heat. I'm going to add in my cumin or any seasonings that you're going to go with. I think I recommended smoked paprika in there. I thought we had some here, but we don't. But they're in the version that I made for you guys. And then now that I added my cumin in here just to give it an opportunity with just the fat before we add any liquidy beans to sort of bloom and open up. You can smell that cumin. It's smelling delicious. This is always the stage when it's very nice to add spices, is after you've just started your aromatics, your onion, your garlic. Then before you add in any liquidy things, bloom those spices and they're going to taste so much nicer. So garlic also cooks really fast and can go from delicious to burned real quickly. So I usually give the onion a head start, then add the garlic. And then we'll give all that a little pinch of salt. And then add canned beans if you've got them, cooked off black beans if you've got them, whatever beans you like, pinto beans. This is your burrito. Do what you like. These beans are, of course, already cooked, so all we're just trying to do is get some flavoring in there and incorporate the seasoning. All right, the temperature on my eggs is pretty low here, so we're going to give it a little more juice. Gently, carefully. And every now and then with the eggs, I'm just going to sort of, oh, yep, we're starting to get some cookage. So you just want to sort of scrape up the bottom, right? And we're just sort of like folding them around so we don't get too much on the bottom. If like I said, if I stood here and stirred and stirred and stirred and stirred and stirred and stirred and stirred, we're going to end up with these like tight eggs that have like all the tight proteins tied up together and then all the liquid oozing out of them on the other side. It's just not as nice of an egg eating experience. The other thing about eggs is that they really have a lot of carryover heat, meaning they're going to, even if you took them entirely out of the pan, entirely off the heat, they're going to keep cooking for a few minutes longer. So I'm going to go ahead and get rid of the heat on this pan, or at least from the stovetop, when they're almost done, because they're going to keep going a little bit longer. Also remember, if you're making these for the freezer, your eggs are going to get cooked again, right? And eggs are delicate creatures, okay? We don't want to, they get their feelings hurt if they get cooked too many times over and over again. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and throw these in a bowl to get them out of the pan. I've got a little bit of sharp cheddar cheese. Whatever cheese you like is great for you. I'm one of those people who's like, the sharper the cheddar, the better. Give me crazy, insanely sharp, sharp cheddar. All right, I'm going to give these beans a little taste and see how they seem. Good job. Again, if you don't have the time or the inclination to cut up an onion and put it in this pot with these beans, with this seasoning, and you just want to open the can to make your burritos, do that. It's cool. It's great. And then you could even just like sprinkle a little cumin on there and keep it moving. If that's the kind of day you're having, you do you, right? No judgment whatsoever. All right. I'm also going to get those beans out of that pan just to give it a little bit of opportunity to cool. Look at that. Look at that. So that was 18 minutes. Again, I don't know what those guys were. I have a feeling they were more than 22. So what I would do with these is let them hang out for a little bit before I try to handle them, because they'll fall apart and get crumbly. But again, you can just take a knife where it's already been scored once they've cooled off a little bit and put them on a rack. Once you've baked them, they're going to be best that day. That's not to say that you need to throw them away at the end of the day. They're going to be fine the next day. We ate them for 2 days last weekend. That's as long as they lasted in my house. After that, they're going to get kind of stale tasting. but they revive quite nicely in a pan of butter. Just a little bit of butter toasted in, like cut that until you got a nice fresh side, and even a kind of stale scone. Or even you could skip the butter, even if you just throw it in that pan and toast it up a little bit. It won't bring it back to its full fresh out of the oven glory, but it'll get you pretty far. Talk about rolling burritos and any tips or tricks I have for rolling burritos. And I would say the main thing to worry about when you're rolling burritos is not overstuffing them. That is the first instinct that we all have, is to overstuff our burritos. These particular tortillas, this is Mission Brand, happens to be what I saw at the store yesterday. It is a whole wheat tortilla. We like the extra fiber there. 6 grams of fiber, it says. These have a nice little stretch to them. You know, if you go to the Chipotle or the burrito place, they're gonna throw the tortilla in a little steamer, and that's what makes it all nice and stretchy. You could do that. You could throw it in a pan if you wanted to warm it up a little bit. It's gonna give it some stretch, but I felt like these did just fine last night. So this is a 10-inch tortilla. I would probably put, I don't know, let's measure it out. Lauren was asking me about this earlier, like how much. My inclination is somewhere between 3/4 of a cup and a cup full of filling, but I've never measured it. I just eyeball it. So we're gonna put in some of our eggs, right? Kind of not quite to the center, a little bit like 3/4 of the way closer to me. This recipe is really meant to be like an egg per burrito. And then we'll do some of our beans. Some roasted red peppers in there. Our pickled red onions. Boop, get back in there. And you can see I'm also not going all the way to the edge. We gotta have room to fold in the insides. And then we'll finish with some cheese. Okay, so I got plenty of room on all the sides. It looks like it's probably a cup or so. Maybe it's 3/4 of a cup, something like that, for this 10-inch tortilla. So the next thing I'm gonna do, right, is I'm gonna give it one roll and pull back. And then I'm gonna go ahead in on my sides, because we want like an envelope, enough of the side roll to sort of keep it together. And then I'm just gently sort of tucking and rolling, and boom, there's our little burrito. You could eat this right now like it is. You could toast it in a pan and get the outside of that tortilla nice and crispy and browned. Or you can wrap it in foil and put it, you know, set up your assembly line, go, 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 right? This recipe makes 8. It doubles fine, it halves fine, although if you gotta open a full can of black beans, you might as well just make them all. So yeah, that's the whole point of this, right? Throw them in the freezer. Now, how are we gonna heat it back up when it comes out of the freezer? Again, you've got options. Lauren mentioned she likes to use her air fryer. That's a great option. You can throw it in an oven, which is what I did with with these guys earlier. I started them in the oven, and now they're over there in that yeah, so, you know, if you're throwing them in the oven, I would say, you know, 350, 30 minutes maybe, depends on how many you're heating off. I probably, if I was trying to go fast, would start it in a pan, right? Even just like in the foil. And would start it on kind of like medium low heat and just sort of like press it to get, I like it when it's kind of toasty, almost like a pressed panini sandwich is probably what my preference would be. You can also throw it in the microwave if that's what works for you. You got all kinds of options. So, breakfast burritos. Yeah. That's how many tortillas I think I have left is one more. All right, so we got our eggs. I think this was 4 eggs. So if I were to take a quarter of the eggs, that's probably about right. And then about as many beans. You know, it's probably a third to a quarter of a cup. Handful of our peppers, handful of our onions. That's probably too many onions. Handful of cheese. And then I'm going to make that first fold to sort of get everything tight in there. And then I'm going to do my sides. One roll over. And then we're just sort of tucking. You want it tight. You don't want a floppy, loose burrito. Truly, y'all, I just put everything together. I did use frozen mango because that's easier to deal with. The mango pieces were kind of big for my personal preference, so I did end up cutting them. I found it easier to cut them while they were still mostly frozen, although I did 3 bags of mango, so periodically I was having to go run my hands under hot water. Yeah, so mango, I actually did the mango and the red onions and the bell pepper and the cilantro and the lime juice. I did all of that last night. And then I saved the avocado for this morning. So I wouldn't add avocado to it until you're ready. But if you wanted to like make it up in advance and, you know, portion it up and freeze it, you could get all this stuff put together even without letting your mango fully thaw. And then get it back in the freezer. You could individually, you know, portion it up and then throw your avocado in as you go, if that's how you want to do it. I didn't put anything spicy in this. You could go with jalapeno if you wanted to, if you wanted it spicy. But you could go with some cayenne pepper or something in it if you want it spicy. But I know we've got a broad audience here with all different types of taste buds, so I just kept it mild, but I thought this would be a nice pairing. You could take your little burrito and cut it right there. And then add in some of our salsa. And that looks like a delicious breakfast, y'all.
Thank you for joining Cancer Support Community Atlanta for this program. If you're interested in other live or recorded programs, please visit the online program tab of our website, cscatlanta.org, or follow us on Facebook. We'll be sharing additional information on upcoming programs.